Matthew Taub. I want to welcome you to the Unapologetically Jewish podcast. Today we have a guest. Normally we're on Zoom. Today we're going to be doing it live. And I want to welcome my guest, our future, hopefully, mayor, Brad Bradford.
Great to be here with you. Thanks for having me on the pod. Thanks for the words of support and encouragement. We got a long way to go, so we just keep working hard every day.
How many days is it?
I think we're about 224 days now.
Nice. We're getting closer.
Yeah. So that seems like a long time, but I promise you there's so much work to do, so much ground to cover in a city that's 640 square kilometers, so many different people to hear from. That time is going to go by like that.
Very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's Christmas right afterwards. So hopefully this will be the best Christmas present ever.
That's right. Yeah. You get right into all the different holidays that sort of land in November, December, January. Lots of good stuff. And hopefully it's time for a new era and a new chapter in Toronto.
I hope so too. So my first question is, I've heard you talk about it before, your past, your history, growing up in Hamilton. So why do you want to lead our city?
I'm all in on Toronto. Right. I'm raising my two daughters here. They're 3 and 5. We chose to call Toronto home. You pointed out I was born down the QEW in a little town called Hamilton. And I still remember that first time I came to Toronto, that first moment. My mom raised 3 kids on her own from 6, 5, and 2. She saved up some money for my 13th birthday, got us tickets to the Jays game, which is fitting because here we are. We got opening day coming up next week. And I came in on the GO train and we arrived in Union Station and I saw the Great Hall and I thought it was such an impressive space. We went out onto Front Street. You see the Fairmont Hotel, the golden glass of the RBC Tower. We went to the old spaghetti factory that night and had dinner. And I walked out of there. I said to my mom, it would be incredible to live in Toronto someday. Do you think I could live in Toronto, Mom? Like, what would that be like? And in a sense, it was the shining city on the hill. I thought the world of Toronto, and that really set my trajectory for things that happened in my life afterwards. I started playing SimCity as a video game, building cities on my computer. I went to grad school for urban planning, and then I started working in the private sector on city building projects across the country. And then eventually at City Hall, I landed in the chief planner's office, and I was working as an urban planner there. And that to me really showed some of the things that the bureaucracy does well, but many of the things it doesn't. Some of the things that were good about local politics, but many of the things that could be better. And, I obviously ended up running for council. I got elected. But where we are right now, today, in March, on the first day of spring, in 2026, I think Toronto is at a crossroads. And I think we are at an inflection point. And when I get up every morning, normally when my 3-year-old runs into our bedroom and gets me up whether I want to or not, it is a reminder of why this work is so important. Because I want my girls and your family and everybody's family to live in a city that is safe for everybody, to live in a city that you can get around, whether you want to take the TTC or drive a car or ride a bike, and a city that families can afford. A city that small businesses and entrepreneurs see opportunities and not roadblocks. So ultimately, the short answer is Toronto has so much potential, but it doesn't feel like we're realizing that potential right now. And I want to get back to basics and deliver the bold and ambitious change that this city needs so that it can be a city that we're proud of.
As we should be. And I think most Torontonians growing up here, we are proud of the city. And that's why we're fighting so hard to kind of, I don't want to say bring it back to what it was, but bring it back to its new glory.
We need a course correction. We need a course correction. And we can't just assume that, it's always going to be a great city if we don't correct course right now and take some action to put us back in a better direction.
We do. So here's a question. We talked about TTC. We talked about safety. What do you think the biggest problems facing Torontonians is today?
I've been hearing from so many people across the city over the past couple of years, and I'm always struck by how consistent the feedback is. It's always different versions of the same story, the same issue set. So for me, it's the 3 C's. It's crime, congestion, and cost of living. And there's different policy prescriptions in each one of those buckets, but people will tell me, Brad, the city's never felt less safe. It's never been less affordable, and it's never been more difficult to get around. So if you start thinking about those as the challenge sets, you move towards different policy prescriptions. Sometimes it's doing more of something. Sometimes it'll be doing less of something. But really focusing on those 3 C's, because I think those are the basics that we need to do a better job as City Hall. If we can get some of those things right, then Toronto really does have the potential to be a destination for people, for talent, for investment, for capital, and the best city where you can raise a family or start a business,
Right.
best city to call home, and that should be our objective.
And it should be, and it will be. And speaking of transit, so when you talk about being, getting around the city, and we look at the transit issues we have, when you look at transit, and I see a lot of posts recently online, it kind of wraps all those 3 C's together,
Yeah, totally it does.
right? Crime,
Congestion, cost of living.
right?
Yeah.
How do you feel the best way to combat that? If we were to put it all into a transit issue,
Yeah.
how would you fix that up?
Well, you're asking me this question in a week where we've had 2 stabbings in TTC subway stations, not to mention all the slowdowns, disruptions, service interruptions, disorder, mental health challenges, homelessness issues that manifest on the TTC every single day. You take that into account, and it's no surprise that ridership of the TTC is only at 79% of what it was in 2019, which was 7 years ago. So fundamentally, people aren't taking transit because they don't feel safe and it's not reliable. We need a transit system that works for a mom with a stroller and a senior with a walker. We don't have that right now. So I've got some proposals I put out there. In fact, I will bring them to council next week for my colleagues' consideration. But we need to have police officers in all of our subway stations. That the presence of a police officer on those platforms, in those stations, has a deterrent factor. The bad guys see that and they typically don't hang around. And if there is an emergency, we have resources in place right away to be able to respond. So I think in light of what's happening, in light of what we've seen, and basically, what other jurisdictions have done, like New York City and others, to respond to challenges around transit safety, police officers in the stations would be a positive. The second thing is we need to have a universal set of cleanliness and lighting standards. You can walk into some of the TTC stations right now, and they're pretty disgusting. And why cleanliness and lighting is important, it sets the bar for what our standards are going to be. It creates an environment that feels safer and more comfortable for our customers. And it's, really the broken window theory in practice.
Mm-hmm.
When something feels like you don't care about it, people tend not to care about it. And that's where you get the lawlessness and the disorder. It becomes a place for those types of activities. So we have to have better standards for cleanliness and lighting. And then the last thing is platform edge doors. And I know that's a big infrastructure thing. It's the idea of those screen doors that slide across when the train's not there. But, it's not uncommon to have 20 people die to suicide on the tracks on the TTC every year. It's just absolutely tragic. Or something as simple as garbage blowing onto the tracks, catching on fire,
Mm-hmm.
and then it shuts down a train during rush hour. So from a safety and a reliability standpoint, platform edge doors is the type of infrastructure retrofit that cities like Paris and Seoul and others have done that have dramatically improved both safety but also the reliability and the performance of the trains. And, there are different cost estimates when the TTC looks at it, very expensive, but there's a lot of smart engineers in other jurisdictions that have done it for far less than what the TTC thinks it'll cost. And I just think that's the type of big city infrastructure. If we're going to grow, if we're going to ask people to take transit, those are things we should be investing in, because to my mind, safety is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And we have to start taking real measures to make the TTC safer for everybody.
Agreed. And let's be honest, if more people were taking the TTC and driving, taking it downtown, right, that will bring more people down to the core.
Yep.
More shops will be left open because we've lost a lot of shops. People aren't going downtown for that reason.
It's transit, and there's a lot of different things that we can talk about for congestion, but the number one thing that we can do to alleviate congestion in the city of Toronto is have more people take transit. Now, it's not an option for everyone. The single mom in Rexdale who's driving a 1999 Dodge Caravan because she goes to a bunch of different jobs. Transit's probably not going to work for her. And by the way, it's not a luxury to drive. It's a handcuff. It's a necessity. It's not a pleasant experience driving in Toronto. It's horrible. But the fact that so few people are taking transit now compared to even 7 years ago, the other side of that is more people are in their cars, and congestion is worse. It's the reason why, despite not everyone being back at work post-pandemic, which is a different story, but we asked people to stop taking transit and get into their cars during those years. And because the transit has become dirty, unreliable, less safe, delinquent, they never got out of their cars and went back to transit. So we have to, that's, for the congestion piece alone, there's a very strong value proposition to have more people take transit. But from a customer experience, we have to make it better if we want people to choose transit again.
Right. And it's got to be something we want to take, not just because there's no parking downtown. So
Yeah.
there has to be a reason why, other than just lack of
it has to be
there.
a better option,
Yeah.
or at least a competitive or comparable option. Right now, it's your option of last resort.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, right? Because if people have other options, they're not taking transit. TTC stands for take the car. And I think
that's how I grew up.
And I think a lot of people are choosing that right now. So it has to be competitive, it has to be reliable, and most importantly, it has to be safe.
Absolutely, and hopefully we can get there. And that's what we're hoping for. The next mayoral election, that we can have that change.
We'll be talking about it.
All right,
and then we'll be doing it.
I hope so. Our city has seen a rise in hatred.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to keep this quick here, resulting in extreme violence, intimidation towards specific ethnocultural groups in Toronto and abroad.
Mm-hmm.
How would you have handled the city's response recently differently than our current mayor?
Well, look, let's just be clear and direct about it. The rise in Jew hatred in this city post October 7th is something I never thought we would see in Canada or in the most diverse city in the world here in Toronto. Just didn't think that existed. And maybe that's my position as a non-Jew, someone who didn't grow up dealing with anti-Semitism, but it is so prevalent and commonplace here. It's truly disturbing. And I think implicitly or subconsciously, there has been a societal permission created through a leadership vacuum, a lack of leadership, where Jew hatred and anti-Semitism is almost shrugged off as common practice. We're a week or two out from 3 synagogues being shot up here in the GTA, 2 in Toronto. And I would have thought that would have been met with broad, loud, collective societal condemnation. And yet, in a lot of quarters, it seemed to be met with a shrug. And so part of that is we don't have leadership at the top that is condemning this in the strongest possible way. Part of that is we don't have leadership at the top that is taking action to address this stuff. And it's not one incident. I'm talking about, what happened last week, but it's really over the past 3 years, slowly but surely, this stuff has been allowed to fester like an infection here in this city. And it will be very difficult to put the toothpaste back in the tube. But the message I always go back to is the rule of law has to apply equally and universally to everybody. We have to keep everybody in this city safe, all people. That's job number one of government across the board. And what that means is, as part of a Western democratic society, we have this collective grand bargain or agreement that there are rules that we all abide by for our collective benefit. But if you don't abide by the rules, there are consequences. Those consequences will be enforced, and then you will have to deal with that in the courts. And right now, we don't have the enforcement. We don't have the consequences. We don't have the follow-up in the courts. And as a result, people feel like they can engage in this type of behavior because, frankly, they can. So I would dial it all the way back to, the days after October 7th. And there are jurisdictions that have taken a different approach. You can look at the leadership of Mayor Del Duca in Vaughan, who has been very clear in his condemnation of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred and all forms of hate. But, the folks there, I think as a community and frontline first responders know, like, if people are breaking the law, they're going to be dealt with accordingly. And right now, I think there hasn't been that political leadership. And too often we're dealing with situations where there are frontline police officers in dynamic and difficult situations, but the only thing that seems to be happening is video recording of events, and then charges may be laid later, and then maybe a crown takes them up, and maybe there's prosecution, and maybe there's a charge that actually stays. And that is very, I think, for the Jewish community in this instance, very unnerving, because it feels like folks are more brazen. And when you look at the statistics and the increase in crimes that were committed that were hate motivated, targeting Jews, the numbers are off the charts right now.
So with that being said, and I know you right now in City Hall are one of a handful of few people who are fighting for this. As mayor, you're going to be the leader of the city and of city council. You also are going to have other councilors supporting all this.
Mm-hmm.
So is that part of the race that you think we need more people to get actively involved in being civic minded and supporting?
I think it's super important. Local government elections are actually the ones that are most impactful on your day-to-day life. Your local councilor in a town like Toronto makes a big difference. Big difference in terms of, being able to respond to issues in the parks, cleanliness standards, whatever basic stuff, fill in potholes, working with Toronto Hydro to do a new hydro hookup. It's the variety of work in local council is remarkable. And I was an urban planner. That's my background. But now seeing all the different stuff that comes across your desk, from TTC to parks to recreation programming to winter cleaning or snow removal, whether that happens or doesn't
Right.
is debatable. But you see a lot of stuff. So yeah, that local councilor is your champion for community on the local stuff, and then also an important voice to consider in citywide issues. So, in elections that will have anywhere between like 27 to 40% turnout here in the city of Toronto, I would say to folks, that's not good enough. And the message would be, don't let bad electoral outcomes happen to you. It's time to get off the sidelines, get into the arena, put your oar in the water, and make a contribution, whether that's door knocking or calling your neighbors or taking a lawn sign or hosting friends over for a parlor meeting. We have to talk about these issues, because complacency and apathy is actually what we're running against. It's not about a particular opponent. It's about apathy. And the antidote to apathy is engagement. And that's what we're going to need from people in this mayoral race coming up.
I love that. And that's so true. We do need to be more civic minded. So my last question, and we'll see where we go from here. As mayor, to ensure all cultural groups feel equally safe and protected, what is your plan for that?
Well, it is a message of safety for everybody. And that's what we need to say over and over again. I will never be a mayor who waxes poetic on foreign affairs. I will never be a mayor who is writing op-eds about foreign conflict thousands of kilometers away. It's not my background. It's not my expertise. Most importantly, it's not my job.
Right.
Got plenty of issues to deal with here in the city of Toronto. But when a mayor or an elected official goes out and makes declarations or proclamations or writes these op-eds that do more harm and hurt to communities and sow more division, and again create that passive permission structure for folks to respond, often with intimidation or violence or hate, that's very unhelpful. And I think that's what we've seen. So the city needs to come together. We're all Torontonians. We're all Canadians. We're all here for a reason. And I go back to the beginning of this conversation where I'm all in on Toronto. I chose to be here. We are choosing to raise our kids here, and we are in a fight for the future of Toronto right now. But there has to be unity. There has to be healing. And it starts with tolerance and understanding of each other, but leaving those conflicts, overseas or at the borders, and focusing on the productive things that we can do together as Torontonians and Canadians. And as it relates to safety and security of all our people, which is what I truly believe, I'm going to be actively involved in that. The mayor has an opportunity to sit on the police board.
Right.
I have committed, and I will sit on the police board, because The police budget is the largest line item in our budget. So from a financial responsibility and value for money, that's important. And also safety of our persons is job number one of government. Mayor Chow has abdicated that responsibility. My view, it's mayoral malpractice, but she has chosen not to sit on the police board. And it shows. It shows that this sort of safety and the issues that we're seeing in a lot of different arenas, whether it's the TTC or home invasions or what's happening on our streets, it just doesn't seem like it's been a priority for this administration. The city is worse off for that. And I'm going to be very focused on a big course correct that brings people together and ensures that the resources and the police have the support that they need, that those resources in play, and that we're doing everything we can to keep everybody safe.
I love that. And there's something to be said about having a mayor when the chief of police is standing there making a statement about things in our city, to have a mayor that stands behind that chief to say, I'm believing in this officer to do everything they can to protect our city. And that's a big statement to say, which we haven't really seen over the last couple of years.
Yeah, we're going to be out there with the police shoulder to shoulder. They have a very difficult job. And, you know, part of the work on bubble zone legislation, not that we have to get into that, but it took us 3 kicks of the can to get that. And I know it's imperfect. But this was the idea of borders to protect places of worship, which have come under attack or still under attack. And I tried to put myself in the mind or the shoes of our first year constable. Maybe they've been on the job 8 or 9 months, and they're out in the dynamic chaos of some of these protests. And, you know, in a split second, they're trying to determine what is hate speech, what is not hate speech. It's difficult. I can appreciate how, you know, you're trying to protect charter rights. You're also on both sides of that, right to free speech, but also not having hate and intimidation. And so the idea of the bubble zone is let's give them another tool that takes that sort of calculation off the table in that moment. And it's like, here's a perimeter. You're either on this side of the line or this side of the line. And if you come on this side of the line, that's a problem. You're going to be arrested. So those are practical tools and things that we can do to make their job on the front lines a little bit, I don't want to say easier because it's not easy, but straightforward in those dynamic moments. And, you know, there's a lot more work that we have to do, but it's an issue, safety. And I think about it as a young father, it's kind of the most important thing.
Right.
Like if you don't have safety and security, nothing else really matters. And I think we've got a lot of room for improvement on that in this city right now.
I think it's amazing. I think that what you said about the bubble zone legislation and having the frontline officers have the ability to have tools that almost separate them from having to make that decision.
Right.
They're
takes it
making
off the
decisions
board.
all
It's
day
like,
long.
here's the line.
Yeah.
Like, don't cross it.
And let's be honest, you know, it's not easy to be a frontline police officer. You know, they might go to a protest and hear screaming in their face and deal with that. There's still people. Then they're going off to a call where they might be dealing with, an in-person domestic issue, or then the next call they're going off to an overdose. Like there's so much going on that we don't give them that understanding that. So if we can make their life a little bit easier, it really helps on where they can actually put their efforts towards really making things safe.
I think that's right.
Amazing. Well, Brad, my last question to you is, if you could choose one thing right now, you didn't have this question before. If you could choose one thing right now, if you could snap your fingers to make a change that you think would be best for the city, what would it be?
It's less of a policy prescription, but I want to go back to a Toronto that is tolerant and supportive and loving, where we focus on the things that bring us together rather than the differences that we might have that are pulling us apart. And there's a lot of different ways to move us in that direction. And I think it is about focusing on those basic core services, creating the opportunities for people to unlock their potential, raising the bar on the city, demanding more, and setting our sights higher and being a city of ambition. All of those things are unifying rally cries that we can all unite around. And, you know, there's a lot more that unites us than divides us. We have a lot of shared interests in the success and prosperity of this city, and we ought to start putting our collective energy behind that rather than the things that might pull us apart. And so it's not the one policy thing that I'm changing tomorrow, but it's like that's actually the goal. Let's get to a place where we're loving, where we're supportive, where we're caring, and we've all got our oar in the water rowing in the same direction. And that direction is to create a city we can be proud of.
I love that. I would say it as we're celebrating Toronto.
Yeah.
We're going back to celebrating Toronto, which I don't think we've done in a long time.
Let's fly the flag. Let's fly it proudly and loudly.
I love it. Brad, thank you so much for joining us on Unapologetically Jewish. Brad Bradford, our future mayor of Toronto. I'm Matthew Taub. I want to thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.